JT Siskowski for Status Coup. I am live here outside of the Broadview, Illinois ICE detention facility, and I'm standing here with Robert Held. Robert, why don't you just start by giving people a little bit of information about who you are?
I'm Robert Held, and I'm just a patriot like millions of other people across the country who are standing up to resist what the Trump administration and his agencies are doing to our communities, including immigrants, those with status, and citizens alike. I'm standing up, we're resisting, and it's not just me, but like I said, it's so many people across the country that are doing what they can do to resist this administration.
We're talking to you today primarily because of what you do for work. Can you lay that out for people and some of your experience?
Well, wait, I've got multiple work, so we got to clarify. I'm a trust and estate litigation attorney, but I don't think that's what you're referring to.
No, not necessarily. But yeah, maybe if you just want to walk us through your resume a little more generally.
Well, it's boring. I'm a lawyer, and I do trust and estate litigation, so I represent fiduciaries and beneficiaries of estates and trusts when there is a dispute about estate or trust administration.
Right. But it was that kind of background in law that really prompted us in wanting to talk to you today, because we're going to talk about some of those federal court proceedings that are happening right now. That's so much of what is happening out here in Illinois with the occupation of the Chicagoland area by the Trump administration. A lot of it is bound up in the courts and waiting on various court rulings and enforcement actions by federal courts that will really determine the future of Chicago, at least in the near term here. A lot is hanging in the balance on some of these court decisions, so we wanted to have Robert on to talk about some of that. Also, because you are a little bit of a famous face around here, you've been out here protesting several times, and since the last time you and I talked, we had posted a video of you running away from ICE agents that went semi-viral that people might know you from, so we'll definitely get into some of that, ask you to talk a little bit about that. But I wanted to start with just your history of protesting. I know that you've now been out here for several weeks, but prior to that, I know that, you weren't necessarily someone who went out to a ton of protests. So can you talk about, why you felt compelled to come out here to Broadview and how often you've been out and what has you so motivated to be out here?
Sure. I mean, I've got a busy law practice, so you're right, I was not protesting at all. But I was starting to get video on my feeds about what ICE was doing from the building that's behind me, and that's the detention center, the federal detention center here in Broadview, Illinois. And what I was seeing in those videos is literally peaceful protesters being pummeled by either pepper balls being shot from the roof of the federal building, sometimes tear gas when others were protesting. This is what I was seeing on the video, and rubber bullets being deployed against people that were not impeding or obstructing ICE in any way, but apparently for unknown reasons, ICE was literally using protesters, innocent, peaceful protesters, for this horrible firing of these less lethal weapons. And so I said, this is crazy, and I started coming out here, and I come out about two times a week or so. It varies. Sometimes I come out twice a day, but for the most part, I come out about twice a week.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize there from Robert that what he's describing about the use of force here on the protesters is not an exaggeration. If anything, I think you kind of have a way of making everything sound measured in the way that you say everything. So I just want to stress that this is stuff that John and I have personally lived through, the tear gassing by federal agents out here and across the city of Chicago, where they have, where they'll create scenes in some of these communities, deploying tear gas, shooting up people with pepper balls, shooting people with rubber bullets, to the great frustration of a lot of the protesters out here. Not one, because of the pain that those agents are inflicting on people who are just out here trying to exercise their First Amendment rights and doing so largely peacefully. We'll talk a little bit about that here in just a moment. But also because they feel like the terms of engagement, the rules by which ICE and the other agencies out here were using that force, was largely unclear. That they would stand where they were told to be standing by those federal agents and then be shot at anyways. So I wanted to, just coming back, I wanted to really dive into why you felt compelled. Like what was different about what was happening out here at Broadview with Operation Midway Blitz, with the what's happening across the city of Chicago, that was different from all of those protests before, that you could have joined and hadn't really felt that pull? Well,
as a child, in the 1960s, my parents took me to a Vietnam War protest, and what was then and there is not what was here and now. So you're right. I speak in measured tones, but there's a absolutely horrific video that many people have seen of I believe, a pastor literally being shot in the head and being felled to his knee. And he was literally praying at the time. So when we talk about, what's happening here and what motivated me to come out, well, I hadn't seen that before I came out the first time. That video, that particular video of Pastor Black, I believe, is really just a horrific, iconic video of what ICE has been doing to violate everyone's rights. And in that case, an innocent pastor just praying.
I want to recognize for a moment that you have not been here every moment of every day, but you have been here a lot. You have seen a lot of the demonstrations out here. I want you to just characterize for me the nature of these demonstrations. Are they as violent as the Trump administration has tried to make them out to be?
The only violence, previously the only violence was coming from federal forces. We don't even know what agency they're from because they don't wear identification and they don't have insignia or, outerwear that shows whether they're ICE, Border Patrol, FBI, ATF. We literally don't know who they are, but they have weapons that they carry, and they've inflicted those weapons on the innocent protesters. So what motivated me to come out is the fact that we've got peaceful protesters with violence being inflicted upon them by federal agents. And I myself was subjected to that. I got some sort of chemical sprayed in my face that debilitated me for a while. And obviously I'm one of many people that have had violence inflicted upon them, with tear gas canisters being thrown, rubber bullets. There's another iconic picture of a protester, and it looks like he has 15 to 20 marks on his back because they just fired upon him. In all cases, the protesters were not impeding or obstructing. And then since then, unfortunately, the state police and Broadview police and the county sheriffs have been, I will say in my words, protecting the ICE facility, I think inappropriately. And so the violence that has been inflicted just in the last couple of weeks, in my view, has been by the state police because they're trying to enforce, and there's a lot to digest here, but they're trying to enforce an unconstitutional order by the mayor of Broadview, which restricts protest activity from between 9 a.m. and 6 p.m. So the recent violence is because the state police has been physically and forcibly trying to remove protesters sometime after 6 p.m.
Yeah, and you start to get to some of those legal questions that I want to get to a little bit later here. I do want to just acknowledge for folks who might just be joining us, because we did just kind of launch into this interview without really much of a to-do. So I am standing here with Robert Held, who is a protester who has been out here, also a lawyer. We're going to get into some of the legal questions that have really surrounded a lot of the protests out here and a lot of the ICE and other DHS agency operations that are happening across the city of Chicago right now. If getting this perspective here on the ground is valuable to you, please go to StatusCoup.com/join. $5 a month is what it costs to keep John and I here on the ground. We've been here for the better part of a month at this point, on the ground day after day. We live out of hotel rooms just to bring you this on the ground perspective. And if we're not here, then there's not really much any appreciable press presence out here. If you looked around right now, you would see that ours is some of the only cameras out here. We've got a couple of people who are live streaming from their phones, but if you look for TV cameras of any kind, the CNNs of the world, they are not here. So if you're relying on them to get your news in this moment, you're not going to be seeing what's happening out here in Broadview, Illinois, outside of this ICE detention facility, which is the center of so much of what is happening in the Chicagoland area with Operation Midway Blitz in full swing. Arresting people, profiling them based on just on the color of their skin, detaining them, tearing apart families, tearing apart communities. And if getting that perspective is important, please go to statuscoup.com/join. We're very proud of the journalism that we have been able to produce with just a small ragtag team out here, and we would love to have your support. That $5 a month, we stretch it to the absolute max, and we are so grateful for you if you are able to give. Thank you.
Can I interject on that point?
Yeah,
because I don't know if it was you, I don't know who it was, but somebody from Status Coup actually caught me on film and on video and caught ICE agents, federal agents, chasing me down on September 27th when I was detained. I didn't even know about that video until some time later when my cousin said, I can't stop watching this. I've been watch it over and over because it's hilarious. Because and maybe it was you that was, I don't know who was doing the filming, but at that time, 2 agents were running after me. I'm 68 with a bad hip, and one of them tripped and fell and said, go get him, get him.
Yeah, you're getting to the next questions that I wanted to ask you about, because if you recognize Robert from our previous coverage, you will recognize him as the man who kind of mimed a mooning at Border Patrol agent Greg Bovino, or not agent, I guess he's in charge of really the entirety of Operation Midway Blitz out here in Chicago. You were yelling some things directly at him in leading up to then these agents chasing you down the street. John went running after Robert and the agents with his camera. You can tell John is sprinting as fast as he can, and Robert is just taking off ahead of both not only John but also these agents who are weighted down by all their gear and likely not in the best physical shape themselves, and who actually fell over in their attempts to catch you. So if you recognize that video that I'm describing, this is the man himself. And if you haven't, please go on our YouTube channel, check it out. It is absolute pleasure to watch. And as you said, yeah, watching it over and over again is something that I've found myself doing. So I'm going to skip a couple of questions just to get ahead to that, since you led us into it. I want you to just talk about what happened in the lead up to those agents chasing you a little bit.
Sure. That was September 27th. I was out here protesting. At that time, there was a fence that separated protesters from the federal agents. And I was making very derogatory, guttural, and dismissive and worse comments to Gregory Bovino in particular. And also I was pretending to moon them. I wasn't literally fully mooning them, but I was pretending. There was no question about the contempt and the disgust that I held for the federal agents. So I had their attention. At some point, Gregory Bovino himself, with roughly 40 federal agents behind and next to him, started opening the gate, which I was thinking, wait a minute, you can't open that gate. That's what's separating you guys with all the weapons from us peaceful protesters. Yes, I was being derogatory and disrespectful and worse, but we were not impeding. Anyway, the gate opened. I'm filming. I've got the video from what happened. That Greg Bovino, the Border Patrol commander, said, clear the street, you're going to be arrested. Let's move them out. And in the next second, they're all marching forward. I'm going backwards and videotaping until I determined to clear the street. And that's when they chased me. And that's when John, your colleague, caught me on the video. And they caught me, too.
And so eventually one of the agents must have caught up to you at some point. What was the arrest process like, and what happened to you immediately after you outran at least one of the agents, because they go falling down and sprawling across the ground, but I assume the other one who kept chasing you is the one who caught you. What was that interaction like, and what happened immediately after?
Yeah, I got up to a fence that's actually a couple of buildings behind you, and the top of the fence had pointy metal on it. I've got the bad hip. I think I had my phone in one hand. I think I had a gas mask on my face, and I made a determination that I wasn't going to be able to easily clear that, and I would get cut up if I did. I gave myself up. And the agent, put his hand on my arm, and I pleaded for him to let me go. And he ordered me to get on the ground, put my hands behind my back, and by then I think there were 3 agents, and I complied. Totally compliant at that point.
Just the fact that you with a bad hip were able to get away, I think says a lot about the quality of the agents that are being employed by DHS in this moment as they attempt to ramp up their hiring. We've also seen reporting in other outlets that some of these agents have criminal histories as well that aren't necessarily being caught in the screening process of the hiring. As you're running away from the agents, what's going through your mind
adrenaline. I wanted to get away. I wanted to get away so badly. And maybe I would have gotten away. You know, in fairness to them, they've got all kinds of gear on. They've got equipment. You can see it in the video, and you can see it whenever you see the ICE agents. They're weighed down. So, but I used to be a runner, and I had the benefit of adrenaline. And if it wasn't for that fence, I would have gotten away. But anyway, once I was in custody, you know, the fight was over. I was totally compliant. I was, you know, just going to do whatever they told me at that point.
So then when they actually detained you, did they take you inside of the Broadview facility here that everyone is protesting outside of right now?
Yeah, they put me in a vehicle with another protester, a guy by the name of Paul Ivory, who's been in the news. And Paul Ivory was in the back of the vehicle. I was next to him. There was an agent kind of hovering over us, and then there was an agent driving the vehicle. They stopped the vehicle right approximately where we are right now. I'm not sure exactly where on Beach Street, but they opened the door, and Gregory Bovino literally was standing there. He looked right at me, and he said, "Now what do you have to say to me?" And he was obviously trying to show his, you know, power over. I was handcuffed with my hands behind my back. I had an agent literally hovering over me, so I did not respond.
Yeah, and I just want to clue everybody in at home. There's a reason that I am going through all of this, and a lot of it is to tease out details like that, where Gregory Bovino, who's leading the operation out here, Operation Midway Blitz for the Trump administration, his exercise of power, that kind of power dynamic, the haves and the have-nots. That's going to be a theme that comes up, I think, in the questions that I ask you about some of the court cases, about what justice looks like here in the Chicago area in this moment, and that's why I'm asking. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about is, you know, if you were able to get inside that Broadview detention facility, if you were able to see anything inside of there, because right now a big question is, what are the conditions like for the folks inside? So anything that you can shed about what it's like in there right now, I think would be most valuable.
Right, sure. And I was in there for 8 hours, although confined, you know, to only a couple of areas and a hallway and so forth. But I should say, in fairness to the federal agents, that other than one agent kind of showing his superiority at the very beginning, I was treated as someone in federal detention should be treated. I was given water. They had Subway wraps that they gave us. I was allowed to make a phone call. But the conditions in there, so for a protester like myself and Paul Ivory that I mentioned, another journalist was detained, Steve Held, no relation, and the several other of us, Mr. Collins, who was in the news because he had a weapon legally and properly, was armed at the time of his detention, was in there with us, as well as several others. We were treated differently than immigrants who were detained in that facility behind me. And I say that because when I was taken for interrogation, I was able to look into a room and I could see the immigrants basically huddled together, shoulder to shoulder, touching shoulders, obviously crammed into a room, which is not the treatment that the protesters had. We were in a room with only 8 of us and had a toilet in that room, and had enough room that we could sit down or even lie down in some cases during those 8 hours of detention.
Interesting. So you're there kind of, I don't, you didn't put a number on how many detainees you saw there inside the facility, how many people in a cell. I mean, could you give an estimate to it, like when you saw, like how many folks were standing there?
No, because I was being led to an interrogation room, and I'm basically, I got multiple agents, in front of me, behind me, next to me. I wasn't handcuffed at that point, so they're kind of controlling what I could do, and I only had literally just a moment to look in. So all I could see is just a row of immigrants with shoulder to shoulder. I think they were maybe sitting on a bench and just shoulder to shoulder. That's all I could see.
Yeah, so we've heard from a Democratic member of Congress recently came out and shared some of the accounts that they have heard about what it is like inside of this facility just down the block from where we are standing right now, saying that it is as many perhaps as 60 people per cell, and some folks are forced to sleep standing up. We've also heard concerning reports about the lack of menstrual products available to the detainees inside and some of the health concerns concerns that causes as well. So thank you for offering that at least little peek as to what you saw in, again, your 8 hours that you were detained. You're released after 8 hours and weren't charged, but a lot of other of those folks who were arrested that day, not so lucky, did get charges, though some were dismissed or bumped down to misdemeanors after some court proceedings. Why weren't you charged while others were?
Well, I didn't commit a crime. I was never told why I was detained, but I think it was,
Even after 8 hours, you never got a reason for why you were detained?
Absolutely not. No. And like I said, no charges filed. There was an Air Force, I'm an Air Force veteran too, but there was another Air Force veteran, I believe age 71 or so. And there's a video widely circulated of him being pushed over in a very demeaning and derogatory and unnecessary way. And I think he tried to hand his cell phone to someone. He was actually charged with assault because as he moved his arm to hand his cell phone to someone, his arm lightly struck a federal agent's arm. And so for him, they charged him with assault of a federal officer. So look, I wasn't charged because there's nothing to charge me with. The video itself that John took, your colleague at Status Coup, and the one that I took show that I'm not impeding, I'm not obstructing, I'm not committing a crime.
All right. So what I wanted to just bring it back to kind of like an overall message that you would want to deliver to people, having experienced all of that out here, everything that we've just gone through. What's your message to people in Chicago and across the country who aren't protesting this administration right now? I mean, do you feel like there is still a value in being out here, even though folks have been, as you say, had these like illegal impositions put on their freedom of speech as they're corralled into these free speech zones, as the protesters call them? Is there still a value in being out protesting this government right now?
There's a huge value. Right now, Trump and his administration, including Kristi Noem, the spokesperson for the Department of Homeland Security, Ms. McLaughlin, are trying to create this narrative. And Tom Homan and even Greg Bovino are all creating this narrative that somehow protesters are violent, or that there's literally a rebellion. I'm not making that word up. That's what the Trump administration has said in their court filings, that there is a rebellion here and the National Guard is needed. So by being out here and protesting peacefully as we are, we're not bending the knee. We're demonstrating that First Amendment rights are valuable. People want to exercise them, and they want to exercise them in a peaceful way. So it counters that false narrative that the administration is trying to portray and trying to justify the lawsuits that are pending in Portland and in Chicago, that there's somehow violence going on. No, the only violence is that violence being perpetrated by the administration's agents.
Thank you for that wonderful transition over to the meat and potatoes of this interview that I wanted to get to with you, which is a lot of these legal questions about where some of these lawsuits stand and some of the implications involved. I want to start with that National Guard lawsuit. So just to catch people up, the Trump administration had nationalized the Illinois National Guard and also had attempted to deploy units from the Texas National Guard and California National Guard out here to the Chicago area. And in doing so, incurred a response from the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois, who filed a lawsuit in federal court challenging the legality of that order. A judge issued a temporary restraining order, meaning putting a temporary pause on the deployment of those National Guard troops here in the Chicagoland area after they had only really been deployed for, I think, a day, maybe two. And then that temporary restraining order, which was only supposed to last for 2 weeks, was then extended and has now been extended indefinitely while we wait for some court proceedings to play out. I'll caution you, though, viewer, that indefinitely does not necessarily mean forever here, because we are waiting on an appeal of that order to the Supreme Court, which could come any day, and if it rules in favor of the administration, would allow these National Guard troops to be deployed here in the Chicago area. So first question, before we get into the legalities of it, is just somebody who lives here in the Chicagoland area. Is the National Guard needed out here to manage these protests?
Obviously not. That's what I was saying just, a few moments ago, is that the protesters themselves are peaceful. It is the federal agents that have fomented violence by literally inflicting less lethal weapons on peaceful protesters. And we've seen things happening in the neighborhoods in Chicago, out here. We've seen it where the federal agents essentially create the violence. And like I said before, I think it's a narrative that the administration is trying to propel by literally creating violence so that they can create videos for themselves and for their lawsuits to say the National Guard is needed. The National Guard is not needed. Everybody that's protested would say, we're peaceful, we just want to shout, we want to express our disdain for what's happening in the facility behind me in the detention center here in Broadview, and for what the administration as a whole is doing to our communities and to the America that we knew.
Absolutely. So then, should we read the temporary restraining order as a sign that the judge is, and that being the judge here in the federal court building in Chicago, is likely to rule in favor of the state? Does that temporary restraining order signal who is likely to win, or is that reading too much into it?
No, because one of the criteria for a temporary restraining order, and we're talking about Judge Perry in the Federal District Court for the Northern District of Illinois in Chicago, just some miles from us, to issue a temporary restraining order, she needs to make a finding that success on the merits is likely. That's one of the legal criterion for the issuance of a TRO, that the state of Illinois is likely to succeed on the merits, meaning that the National Guard is not needed because factually there's no rebellion and law and order can be maintained by existing police forces, and that the National Guard is not needed for that purpose.
All right, so that is at least one sign of hope, but that temporary restraining order, as I said, has been appealed up to the Supreme Court, which could knock that down. One question I wanted to get to here is just, can we really expect justice from a Supreme Court that seems so ideologically slanted in one direction? Does justice at the highest court still exist in the United States of America, in your opinion?
Yeah, I don't have enough information to honestly predict what the Supreme Court may or may not do. There's an emergency appeal by the Trump administration to the Supreme Court, and theoretically they could rule at any minute or at any day on staying, meaning blocking the temporary restraining order that Judge Perry issued. Meaning, to translate that into English, the Supreme Court could say, National Guard, have at it, deploy, you're in there, Trump controls the National Guard, they're federalized, and they can immediately be on the streets of Chicago, including at this ICE facility here. However, it's possible that the Supreme Court will not rule at all and will make no statement, at least for the time being, which meaning the case is back in Judge Perry's courtroom. And as you said, there's this indefinite temporary restraining order, which would then remain in effect because the government has actually caved and agreed to the temporary restraining order, in my view, then essentially conceding that there's not an emergency because they're willing to say, hey, we don't need anything to happen immediately. We're consenting to the TRO, temporary restraining order, remaining in effect for an indefinite period of time until there's a trial or until the Supreme Court does step in, which again, don't know what's going to happen or when it's going to happen or if the Supreme Court will actually weigh in at all.
What strikes me as just a layperson looking at all of this is how many opportunities the Trump administration has to, win this case. Judge Perry could rule in favor of them. The Supreme Court could lift the temporary restraining order, allowing the National Guard back onto the streets of Chicago. Or the Trump administration could go down the route of just invoking the Insurrection Act and using military forces that way. Is my reading of it there correct? I mean, is the deck stacked here in favor of the Trump administration, barring, extenuating circumstances?
I don't know whether I'm an optimist or what, but it's just the facts. There has to be a factual predicate for the use of the National Guard. And not in Illinois, but in the Portland, Oregon case, the judge there said that the government is not tethered to the facts, or words to that effect. There's a great deal of skepticism in Chicago, too, with Judge Perry and another case about what the administration is saying as to what the facts are. But look, I'm on the ground here. No, I'm not in the neighborhoods in Chicago, although I'm in the city daily in my practice. But here at this ICE facility, the notion that the National Guard is needed is absolutely absurd. There's no factual basis for that at all. In fact, in my view, the Broadview police are plenty, and most of the protesters here have a great relationship with Chief Mills of the Broadview Police and Deputy Chief Johnson, and the mayor as well. There just isn't violence. There's no predicate for the National Guard whatsoever.
Yeah, and I'll just to underline that point, last night out here we were live. If you were with us at the time, what you would have seen was that as the protesting hours, which end at 6 p.m., and something that I should keep an eye on here as we talk, because it is currently 5:34, but with protesting hours ending at 6, the police attempted to clear the crowd. And what we had seen the week before was that then law enforcement came in and arrested several people. But what happened last night instead was that law enforcement took a more relaxed approach, kind of let the protest peter out naturally. And there was that dialogue that we saw between the chief of police and several of the protesters. So it does seem like that two-way dialogue exists where it doesn't exist with the federal agents, because as we saw in your case where you went running away from the agents, all the warning you got was Greg Bovino saying, like, get out of the street or you're going to get arrested, and then immediately sent the agents in. So it's a very, very different dynamic here.
Absolutely. And, I know that there's an organization called the Chicago Council of Lawyers. Chicago Council of Lawyers sent a letter to the governor on Friday. And in that letter, sought some things, including dialogue, and particularly with respect to the state police that the governor controls. After that letter, just within 2 nights, it seems like the state police presence has certainly diminished, and the dynamics have certainly changed in that time. As you pointed out last night, I watched your live stream video about what was happening, and certainly the Broadview police were very accommodating, I think, to the protesters, because they waited till way after 6 before it, escalated to any degree, which I don't even think it did. I actually had to turn it off at some point before 7, but it was certainly a change in the culture here.
Yeah, absolutely. So I wanted to turn from the National Guard lawsuit to this other lawsuit that we were going to talk about, which is a lawsuit really around the use of force that the federal agents operating here in the Chicagoland area are allowed to use. Also, a restraining order there on maybe if you could just really explain like some of the ways that the federal forces out here have been barred from using certain tactics, and when, I know one of them being like when they can deploy tear gas and the like. Right,
that's right. And that other lawsuit, this new lawsuit we're talking about now, was brought by primarily journalist organizations and is before Judge Sarah Ellis in the Northern District of Illinois. She issued a temporary restraining order which does a few things. It restricts the tactics and the weapons that federal forces can use. It also requires them to have body cameras, and it requires them to have an identification number on their body or their helmet so that they can be identified. Now, they can still wear masks. The temporary restraining order says nothing about the use of masks, and there are exceptions to all of this. And they also have to give 2 warnings before they deploy tear gas or other weapons. And obviously, everything I just said is subject to exceptions. If someone's safety is at stake, they don't have to comply with any of that. I could go on, but I'll let you ask the next question.
Yeah. I wanted to jump in and talk about some, like, even allowing exceptions. To me, it seems like, because we've already seen federal agents using, operating outside the bounds of that temporary restraining order, using force in ways that they're not supposed to. And in at least one case, Gregory Bovino, who again is leading a lot of the operations out here for the federal government, claimed that he was hit in the head with an object or a rock. But we've seen that the federal government in these cases has not been a reliable source of information. In fact, the plaintiffs in that case have kind of intimated that they believe that Bovino is lying, that they haven't, the DHS hasn't supplied any evidence that he was hit in the head with a rock before they tear gassed a neighborhood here in Chicago. Are federal judges doing enough here in the Chicagoland area? I mean, they're issuing temporary restraining orders, but giving some of these outs to federal agents, I mean, is it investing too much good faith in the federal government right now?
No, I don't think so. I think that the judges they're doing what they can. So judges don't have a police force. They can only take in the information that they see and issue orders based on that. But I think Judge Ellis is in fact being very aggressive. She is requiring Gregory Bovino to appear Tuesday, I believe at 10:30 a.m. in federal court, in her courtroom. And as far as I know, he will not be carrying a gun. I don't think you can take weapons into the federal courthouse. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Now, they don't live stream or broadcast federal cases, so we'll have to wait for reporters to report on what happens. But it's actually my intention, if my schedule allows, to be on the street when Gregory Bovino enters the courtroom, although he may use a private entrance. But maybe if I can get into the courtroom to watch for myself about how Sarah Ellis, Judge Sarah Ellis, handles Gregory Bovino. But the point is that there is video of Greg Bovino lobbing some tear gas into what appears to be peaceful protesters, but we don't have the full context. So in fairness to, getting the facts, I looked and tried to find a video that gave me more context than what is the news reports have shown. I don't have the full context, but there's certainly the appearance that Greg Bovino violated the temporary restraining order, and theoretically the government could be held in contempt. I'm probably getting ahead of ourselves here, but the judge has the power to hold a litigant in contempt if they violate an order of the court.
So holding someone in contempt like Greg Bovino or like the federal government, what power does a federal judge, as you say, they don't have their own police force to enforce that ruling. I want to pause for just a moment just to acknowledge there's an agitator out here, a pro-ICE or a pro-administration agitator out here who is causing quite the scene out here. So the protesters are shouting him down. So if you hear the noise in the background, that's what it is. We've seen quite a few of these out here.
I support everybody's First Amendment rights. I personally would ignore the counter-protesters, but not everybody does do that. But that counter-protester has the same right as every other American to peaceably assemble.
And so we were just there talking about before we had that distraction, we were just talking about the ability of the federal government to enforce, or of the federal judge, to enforce any, ruling of contempt of court on the federal government or on Greg Bovino or on the operations out here. If they don't have their own police force, what can they do? And are we just really holding the federal government to the honor system in this moment?
Well, this is a little bit beyond, the scope of my knowledge, but I am knowledgeable about contempt itself. And a judge has the power to issue a monetary fine. They have the power to put someone in custody. And those are things that a judge could very well do if someone is actually held in contempt. But there's a process to get there. That will not happen Tuesday. It may not happen ever, because the facts are still to be developed about what is happening. Now, I know the plaintiffs in that case, are making the appropriate case that agents and Greg Bovino himself have violated the temporary restraining order. Judges take that very seriously. So there's a possibility, like I said, of monetary fines or someone being held in custody for being in contempt of court. And of course, within the litigation itself, the judge has the power to either restrict discovery or restrict what evidence is presented, what witnesses are presented. Those are all theoretical options that are unlikely to apply in this case, but just on a theoretical basis. And then also another area that I have very little knowledge of is that there are federal marshals that, is essentially they have police powers, but I don't know the contours of the marshal's power.
So then let's pretend for a moment that you are a lawyer for the federal government. I get that this is not your typical area of practice, but what advice are you giving to Greg Bovino on how he should comport himself in Judge Sarah Ellis's courtroom? Because at least when we've seen him out here, we see escalatory tactics. I mean, I've watched him just a few feet from me grab a protester and throw him to the ground and handcuff him himself. And we've watched him now. We've seen video of him just lobbing tear gas into neighborhoods. I'm assuming you're going to advise him not to tear gas the courtroom, but aside from that, what advice are you giving to Greg Bovino?
Yeah, this would be a time, if I'm lawyer for the Trump administration, which I won't ever be, to not speak. Let the lawyers speak. Say nothing, do nothing, wear a suit, have your body language be conciliatory and respectful to the court. And if you're asked a direct question, give a direct response that's not in any, that just shows your respect and honesty. And that would be my advice. But there's probably a lot more nuances going on. I assume that the government's going to be very aggressive in terms of the lawyers that are representing the Trump administration, and they're likely to let the judge know that there were exigent circumstances, that he was struck, on the head with whatever he was struck with, and maybe there's video evidence about that. But I assume that they're going to come across extremely aggressively to Judge Ellis about how what he did was necessary.
Before I move on from some of these court cases to talk about, some of the feel-good stuff coming out of today that you were involved with that we'll get to here in just a second, are there questions that I may not know to ask about these cases just because I am a lay person? Are there big takeaways here that we haven't gotten to cover that you think we should?
I'm sorry. I also wanted to mention, did you see Vino's tweets about the judge?
Oh, yeah. So, no, I figure I'll have you at an information disadvantage there.
That's okay.
So, I'm going to kind of hit you with something that is, that Levy and Levy filed today. This is in the journalist case where Greg Bavino is going to be asked to appear to justify his use of force in some of these areas. I'm going to pull up, some of the, filings from just today and read you some statements that, Greg Bavino allegedly made to a reporter about Judge Sarah Ellis, here in just a moment.
I'm going to be shocked because this is not a time for boisterous, aggressive posturing. This is not that time. Judges are powerful. Even though they don't have their own police force, they have a lot of power with respect to the cases that are being litigated in front of them.
So this is from the Chicago Tribune's court reporter Jason Meisner, who said, in a new filing today, plaintiffs accused, that being the lawyers for the journalists who are represented in this case, accused the immigration agents of new violations of Judge Sarah Ellis's restraining order limiting the use of tear gas on protesters in a raid on Little Village, that's a neighborhood in Chicago, last week. They also say Commander Greg Bavino lied about getting hit in the head with a rock. So I'll just jump in here to some of the interesting takeaways from this filing. It says, following the incident, defendant Greg Bavino was interviewed by a reporter. In that interview, defendant Bavino appears uninjured, meaning that no physical evidence that he was ever hit by a rock. He says in response to questions from a reporter, something to the effect of, quote, did Judge Ellis get hit in the head by a rock like I did this morning? Unquote. Defendant Bavino continues saying something like, quote, maybe she needs to see what that's like before she gives an order like that, unquote. How is that likely to play before the judge?
Did you say that was in a filing that the law firm for the journalists put already in the public record?
Correct.
I'm going to go look that up when I get to a computer. But if that's in the record right now, that will not play well because it's not relevant what Judge Ellis's personal circumstances are or experience with protests or violence. It's just not part of what's being litigated. What's being litigated right now is whether federal agents, including Gregory Bavino, have complied with their court order. Now, the remedy for a court order that they disagree with, that they think is not grounded in fact or is contrary to the law, is to go to the appellate court. That's what you need to do. You don't make aggressive statements about the judge's personal experiences because we're all human. And it's not a time to irritate the very person that's the judge in the case where you're a litigant. And he is, in fact, a named defendant in the journalist case.
Okay. So again, I'll come back to, is there anything else that I should be asking about these cases that I might not know to ask about?
Sure. There's so many cases. There's the case in Portland because there's been protests, and you guys, I think you guys travel a lot, so you may have, in fact,
we've been talking about Portland. We haven't been there yet in this most recent round of protests, but it's something that we're certainly keeping an eye on.
So, I mean, the other thing to talk about really is Portland, and what's going on there is factually a little bit different than what's happening here, which is completely peaceful, albeit noisy protests, but peaceful protests. But in Portland, it's slightly different because I think the protesters have, different access to the facility. there's certainly been more violence there, and the narrative that there is violence is one that can resonate, with the courts a little bit more. And in fact, the judge out there said that they could use the National Guard. Now, wait a minute, I may have this wrong, but ultimately the status there is that the Anbank 9th District Appellate Court temporarily paused any National Guard from being deployed there. But it appears that if National Guard goes anywhere, they're going to be in Portland, so that's something to watch. I don't have as much information about that because I'm really trying to follow this more closely, but that would be an area to explore, because I think that the next thing that could happen is that we see National Guard troops in Portland. It's possible.
Does that have implications for Chicago? If a judge makes one ruling out in Portland, can that impact the cases here in Chicago, or are they really separate?
They're separate cases. There's different factual predicate here in Illinois than there is in Oregon.
Thank you very much for that. So, John, I'm just going to give you a little bit of a warning. I'm kind of interested in transferring us over to Robert's taco table, so I'm going to let you kind of get us into a mobile position here. And while I do, I want to note that we are able to cover what is happening with the federal courts while also keeping an eye on these protests at the same time, and going out and getting stories from the community during the day about the impact that ICE agents are having on their communities here. We just today posted a story that I got with a homeowner in Chicago's Lakeview neighborhood, where where ICE agents came there and chased people in through private property, left boot prints inside of a man's garage, left one man bleeding inside of a home, that left blood across the floor, where we showed you pictures and video of that interaction, and how agents were so just disregarded private property, and just terrorized this neighborhood, and ended up deploying tear gas into that neighborhood as well. And I'm wondering if that's going to come up in the court hearing on Tuesday. But we're able to do all of that, be in all of these places, and still have these heady conversations about all of the legal wranglings down at the courthouse, as just a small team here, just John and myself here on the ground, and then a small team of 3 people that we have back in their offices that are helping produce some of these videos for you. We do all of that on just a shoestring budget. So if you support what we're doing, what we're able to do, be such a scrappy operation, be all these places and have all these conversations and bring in people to have these legal opinions on what is happening right now, get a little bit of insight into some of the law and some of the machinations around that. Be able to do all of this, things that reporting that you're not seeing on CNN right now, or in some outlets like the New York Times, where these reporters aren't here. I'm looking around. We're the only camera out here right now. If what we're able to do with just $5 a month donations seems important to you, please go to StatusCoup.com/join for $5 a month, 16 cents a day. You keep us here on the ground doing this. We do this because we believe it's important in this moment. As authoritarianism takes root in this country right now, we believe it is important to expose the truth of what is happening on the ground in these places, to challenge the administration where it wants to be able to say so badly, that there is an insurrection here in Chicago, and show you these largely peaceful protests that do not require a National Guard response at all. If you think that is important, please, 16 cents a day, StatusCoup.com/join. We would all be incredibly grateful. So with that, I wanted to move over to a bit of a happier topic. And Robert, this is your taco table over here. Real abrupt change of subject, but I wanted to, you have done, you've been out here so much, you wanted to give back a little bit. Can you explain the gesture? Why did you want to be out here and offer, I think it was 120 free tacos out to protesters, police, journalists alike?
Yeah, first of all, the protesters are making a huge sacrifice. For others, they're basically doing their job. If we're talking about the police or the ICE in the building behind us. They're usually legal observers from the National Lawyers Guild. I didn't see them out here tonight, but I brought this out for everyone. In fact, I, in violation of the executive order, literally walked over to the police, although I had my hands up so they wouldn't feel threatened, literally with tacos to offer them to the police behind us. But one of the protesters who are making a great sacrifice to exercise their First Amendment rights to have a little dinner, and I, tried to get the word out that I'd have these here, and it looks like all but 3 of them, and I'm still hungry. But you guys are more than welcome to help yourself to a taco as well. But I wanted to do that.
I won't do the audience the disservice of eating on camera, but John, feel free to mow down there behind the camera. Oh, John reports that can confirm that he had one already. So can you explain a little bit of the spread, what you brought out? And then I want to talk a little bit about the interaction that you had with police when you went over to offer them a taco here in just a moment. But just kind of establish what you all brought for folks.
I brought steak tacos, chicken tacos, and vegetarian tacos, and let's see. So, yeah, when I went over to the police, they were very polite. They were very quiet. Their body language was not aggressive at all. They didn't yell at me for, walking out onto the street, but they politely declined any of the tacos. But all of I think I had, actually, did I have 130 total, maybe? It looks like all but 3 of them have been consumed.
So obviously, quite the response, and even from a smaller crowd that we have out here usually on a Sunday. Why did you feel like it was important that you had to? You're usually out here with the protesters. Why was it important to you to also offer to the police to go up to them and say, "Hey, I brought these for you guys"?
We need to have a good relationship with the police. I think that we have a common interest with the state police, with the county sheriffs, and with the Broadview police. And what is that common interest? I don't think anybody wants to have violence, because as I said earlier in the interview, that violence helps the Trump narrative. The Trump narrative is there's violence and we need the National Guard. If there's no violence, then we don't help that narrative. So I want to maintain, although I express my First Amendment rights pretty passionately at times, that we do have that common interest, and so it was just a small gesture.
What was the response you got from the police when you went up there to offer it to them?
Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, we appreciate it, and they didn't take any.
Okay, but it was still you felt like a cordial relationship there.
Absolutely, and Commander Owen, who is the leader of the state police, is not out here tonight, but. We disagree, on some things, their tactics and the way they have forced protesters to, move from one area to another or even vacate. I think that's now a thing of the past. I mean, I'm hoping what you described as happening last night, where it was no state police visibly present. I'm sure they were in the back, but just the Broadview police being very polite, very patient, I hope is the new culture here.
So, I mean, you got to be feeling pleased that a lot of this is gone. The gesture itself is certainly feel good. You've expressed a lot of positive feelings about these protests out here, what is to be gained from them. To your mind, is this the way out of the authoritarian direction that it really feels like the country is headed in? Is it demonstrations like this, or does it need to be paired with more? And if so, what?
Well, I think everybody should come out. And I think eventually, and I don't know if you can get it on the camera, but we are, not just we, but the protesters are kept a great distance from the building. So people want to express their contempt, if you will, for what the Trump administration is doing in that building. And I think eventually, I'm hopeful that we'll be allowed to go closer to that building so that people can actually, when they shout, could theoretically be heard by somebody entering or leaving that very federal building. I think everybody should come out because it shows other people that we're standing up. So people need to see that their feelings are, being expressed by those who have the ability and the time and the inclination to actually be present at this facility. But it also shows that demonstrations are peaceful. Demonstrations are not violent and don't continue that the administration's narrative about protesters being violent. So it's important for those reasons, and you gain information. There's people here that are university professors, historians. There's people from all walks of life. There's the clergy is out here. The National Lawyers Guild is out here. You just by interacting with other protesters, you gain information about what's going on. So I think for those reasons, it's very, very important that people do whatever they can do. And if you can't be out here, in my opinion, people should, talk to their congressmen, write letters, and record, as the governor has asked us. Governor Pritzker asked us to record what ICE is doing on a daily basis. Whatever you can do, you should do it. This is not the time for acquiescence.
So there were just a couple of last heady questions that I made note that I wanted to get to, and so I wanted to ask first of all about since you are a lawyer, get at least the perspective here is how possible some of this is, though I recognize I'm probably catching you unawares with some of these topics, so feel free to let me know. But is certainly with Trump and a potential third term. We recently had Steve Bannon, a former advisor to the president, come out and say that that people need to get comfortable with the idea of Trump serving a third term. We've also seen the president do some things like install 2020 election deniers in some key positions that have to do with election integrity and confidence in U.S. elections. How feasible do you see a Trump third term? How are you preparing yourself either mentally for or thinking through what sort of actions you need to be taking as a private individual or as an attorney to respond?
You're right about the word heady in the question. I don't know what Bannon's agenda is, but we do have to take Trump seriously, and he's made statements that are outrageous and they're unconstitutional. The president is limited to 2 terms. That's it. And so he's going to be done. But to the extent that we have a January 6th event or some other conduct, ultimately, it's interesting. The administration has said to the Supreme Court, if you tell us something, we're going to abide by it. And if it's a federal judge, they've implied that maybe they don't have to abide by it. And in fact, they have violated federal judges' court orders. And they probably the same for the appellate court, that they don't feel, the administration does as a whole, that they have to comply. But with respect to the Supreme Court, they have said flat out, if you tell us, then we're going to comply. So how does it all play out, Supreme Court?
And that's where it all comes back to, and that gets back to the question that I asked you earlier about, how does our Supreme Court stack up? I won't relitigate that here. But I should note that it just switched over to 6 o'clock, so we are at the end of the protesting hours out here. You earlier referred to the setup out here as unconstitutional, or at least the limitations that Broadview has put on the protesting out here as unconstitutional. Can I get you to really specify? Is it the physical space? Is it the hours? Is it a combination? Where do you see the limitations that have been put here on the protesters as crossing that line into unconstitutional?
Well, there's one thing that's demonstrably unconstitutional, and that is the restriction from 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. as the Broadview mayor has decided as protest hours. In other words, restricting peaceful protesters to those hours, 9 to 6, is unconstitutional on its face for a number of reasons, including the fact that people that are working traditional hours, for 15 hours a day, can't come out here. And for many people working traditional hours, that means that effectively they can't protest unless it's on the weekend. And so in that sense, the mayor's edict is unconstitutional. But there may be other issues too.
But before you enumerate those, and I'll get it over to you for in just a second, but I wanted to make a point here that is, if you're watching this at home, the protest hours don't necessarily affect you directly, you may think. But if you are invested in what is happening here in the Chicagoland area and the way that it is being used as a testing ground by this administration for what it can get away with the potential for the invocation of the Insurrection Act, troops in American cities and in states across the country, if you're invested in that, then these are the people who are standing on the front lines here attempting to resist some of that, some of what the Trump administration is doing out here, and they are being slowly put into a corner. Their voice, by extension, the voices of Americans across the country who cannot be out here right now, voices are also being limited. I just like to make that point as to why this is a broader issue and not something that is just local here. But you were about to enumerate some other issues that you identified beyond just the time. What are some of those?
Well, we're penned into a narrow area by concrete barriers. And I think that the placement of the barriers and the limited space that we have is problematic because oftentimes there's hundreds and hundreds of people here and it's too small, but probably more fundamentally, it's so far from that federal detention facility that it effectively diminishes our voice by keeping us so far from the very facility that we're protesting against.
And other protesters have made the point that it really prevents the protesters from being able to throw sand in the machine, so to speak. You know, federal agents don't have to be out here minding the crowd, so they're able to go out across Chicago and abduct more people, as we just saw ourselves today out in Addison, where we have several stories pending there about folks who have been disappeared from that community as well. Robert, thank you for all the time. Is there anything else? We've talked a lot. Is there anything else that you want to say before I let you go?
I just want to say to you and your colleagues, thank you so much. You've made the point, but I'll doubly emphasize it, that I don't see, Fox or CBS or ABC7, WGN or NBC or anybody out here right now. But yet, this is democracy. This is the fundamental right of people to peaceably assemble. You guys are covering it. And I've seen you personally in the face of state troopers that are being very aggressive and covering what's out here, and I appreciate it very much.
Thank you very much. We appreciate you, Robert, and for all of your insight today. Thank you for all the time when we've left your taco table manned by someone close to you, I assume. But without you by their side, so I'll let you get back to that now. Thank you very much for the time. I appreciate it. Okay, so that was attorney Robert Held. So he has been a staple out here in this protesting scene out here in Broadview, Illinois, just outside of the Broadview, Illinois ICE detention facility, that brick building just down the street from where we are standing right now, where inside ICE agents are using that as their base of operations for much of what they are doing here in Chicago. We are hearing about groups of people being forced to sleep standing up because they are crammed like sardines into cages there. Concerning reports that we have heard about the sanitary conditions inside, etc., etc. And then, of course, the perhaps the most brutal pain of it all, which is what is being inflicted here on communities in Chicago, on the families here that should not be lost. That every day we are seeing ICE agents fanning out across the Chicago area, going in unmarked vehicles or outright disguised vehicles and abducting people, taking them by force, as a matter of, in basically like plainclothes disguise in a lot of cases, their faces covered, not announcing who they are, not producing federal warrants, and just going out and unilaterally imposing their will here on the city of Chicago. So much of that based right here. And that is why these protests are gathered here. That's why all of these lawsuits have been filed. And that's why we wanted to hear from Robert tonight to get his insight as an attorney into how some of this will play out and what it will mean here for the city of Chicago. And to that end, we talked quite extensively about Commander Greg Bavino, who is leading a lot of the operations out here for the Trump administration. He is going to be appearing in federal court on Tuesday. We are expecting protests outside of that federal courthouse. Status Coup will be there on the ground. John and I have already been making plans. We will be there. We will show you those protests live. So if you have not, please subscribe. If you have already done that, please go to StatusCoup.com/join and help us afford to continue to to pay for our hotel rooms, to pay for our food, to pay for our transportation while we are out here, to keep us on the ground here. I always like to bring up the fact that, John and I give up a lot to be out here in terms of time and energy. I'm away from my newborn right now, who I just want to be home with. Anna, if you're watching, I love you so much. Thank you for doing so much for our daughter right now while I am away. But we know that this is so important that we need to be here showing you what is happening. If you agree that it is that important, please go to StatusCoup.com/join and throw a few dollars our way. 16 cents a day is all it costs to keep us on the ground here in Chicago. With that, I'm going to at least take a step off to the side here for just a minute so I can get some water, and I'll have John just kind of show you the scene out here.
Don't let Donald Trump win, that nigga cancer. He too rich, he ain't got the answers. He can't make decisions for this country, he gon' crash us. No, he can't be a slave for him. He got me me appreciate nobody way more. Hey, Donald. Name one that follows. You gave us your reason to be president, but we hate you. Donald Trump. Fuck Donald Trump. Yeah, nigga, fuck Donald Trump. I don't like your ass. Yeah, fuck Donald Trump. Yeah, fuck Donald Trump. Yeah, I really don't like Trump. Yeah, nigga, fuck Donald Trump. Yeah, fuck Donald Trump. Yeah. Nigga, am I tripping? Let me know. I thought all that Donald Trump bullshit was a joke. Know what they say when rich niggas go broke? Look, Reagan so cold, Obama so hoe, Donald Trump spend his trust fund money on the vote. I'm from a place where you probably can't go. Speaking for some people that you probably ain't know. It's pressure built up and it's probably gonna blow. And if we say go, then they probably gonna go. You vote Trump, then you probably on dope. And if you like me, then you probably ain't know. And if you been in jail, you can probably still vote. If we let this nigga win, we gon' probably feel broke. You build walls, we gon' probably dig holes. And if no ass do it, fuck Donald Trump, fuck you. Fuck Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah, nigga, fuck Donald Trump. Yeah, fuck Donald Trump. Yeah, fuck Donald.
If you've been with us, thank you very much. We appreciate it. One last pitch here to just go to statuscoup.com/join, $5 a month. We really appreciate it. We're going to wrap up here. We've got, a week ahead still of coverage to bring you here from Chicago. Be looking forward to that protest on Tuesday morning when we will be going live from outside of the federal courthouse. Try to get the announcement of that live stream out for you as it gets a little bit closer, but right now, Tuesday morning. But for now, live from Chicago, I'm JT Siskowski for Status Coup. Thank you. Good night.
Let this nigga win. God bless the kids. God bless the kids.